All right, YouTube, what's up? Here's my next project. I got this 1971 Chevrolet Nova. It looks like it was back halved, and I actually had to buy it without looking underneath it. And kind of tied between doing drag racing, kind of switched to autocross afterward. I want to do both, So did some drag racing. I thought autocross would be more fun. So yanked the 6-cylinder out, yeeted that bad boy, painted this subframe over here, cleaned out the interior. Dude was so kind enough to put all sorts of junk in there for me, so that was very nice of him. But I actually had a four-door Nova with a built 5.3 in it. Stock bottom end, just went through it, did some head porting, some oil pump work, head work, valve springs, 6715 Ghost Cam, I believe, or 8715 Ghost Cam from Summit Racing. But so my buddy actually let me use his shop, and we pulled this bad boy out. And we did this in one weekend. So I think I've had the 71 Nova for 3 months now. But it just seemed like a better platform since it was caged already. So here's the 5.3 sitting in there. It has a TH350 from the 4-door Nova, and here's pictures of the 4-door Nova before I got rid of it. As you can see, the subframe was notched because I was in college. I had a tight budget. Couldn't afford to get an oil pan that fit. And this is the type of condition that the 4-door Nova was in. It just was not worth the time and effort to restore it. And I tried getting rid of it on a marketplace, and a bunch of people think they could restore it, and at this point you really couldn't. But there's a 6-cylinder we threw in there. And had an old Glide that was like missing parts also in the trunk that came off the 2-door. So this is how she sat. Then I had this idea. I was like, I want to get some coilovers on the 2-door Nova, the 71. I'm calling it the SLOVA Nova. And because I want to do autocross, I was like, well, I should just get some used motorcycle ones. It just makes sense. It's cheaper financially. And I was looking at the steering, and I was like, okay, I might want to make my own steering linkages and do some Ackerman, anti-Ackerman, and regular drag racing, and move the steering pickup point farther away from the steering axis for drag racing so it's less sensitive. Then it came over and I was like, maybe I'll do a bell crank setup. So I ripped some cardboard up at the 4-door Nova and started sitting it in there and mocking it up. And I was like, I think the motorcycle suspension could sit right here. Bell crank right here, push rod going through the A-arm, cut the frame, mount the damper right there. I thought that was going to work. So I got home, started drawing it up, made some brackets, 3D printed it. I didn't actually set this 3D printer up. I was so lazy. The first print didn't come out right, and I just had part of the bell crank pivot bracket, and I tried using that to mock up. I saw someone on Facebook actually had a RideTech True Turn system and allowed them to fit 10-inch wide wheels in the front, and I figured this would be a good idea. Basically, it just relocates. It has a different steering linkage that moves it closer to the center of the wheel, and it relocates the steering linkage arbs. And here I found some Hayabusa shocks. There's 3 for $170, so I went ahead and bought it. Did the drawings for how everything was going to sit together on the pivot mounts and the bell crank and all that stuff. And basically, there's only 2 inches of travel on a Hayabusa shock, and I have it set up so that it's like double the ratio at the push rod, which translates to 4 inches at the push rod, and the push rod is about half the length from the control arm, so it's about 8 inches of total suspension travel before it hits the bump stop on the Busa shock, which I think is plenty fine. Here about RideTech True Turn spindle, and they actually sent me Speedway spindles, and which are significantly cheaper, and I was upset because it was $200 cheaper, so I returned it and then bought the exact same spindle. I called RideTech to make sure it was okay because the part number was slightly different. They're like, yeah, it's the same one, it just comes with a different manufacturer. So here's actually the Speedway Motors one. As you can see, it's completely identical. I measured it and made sure everything's identical. So definitely save your money. Don't buy the RideTech one. Buy the SpeedTech one, I believe. SpeedTech? Anywho, here's a mock-up. I actually got 4 of those Hayabusa shocks instead of 3 that I originally purchased. Here's the RideTech relocation. This is actually generation 1. The new generation actually changes the drag link. And I asked them about the old generation, if they had any of the old generation parts, if they could just tell me the linkage or something, and they said no. So, yep. Anywho, this is someone else online on the Nova, and they fabbed up their own steering linkage. Kind of inspired me, and here's a 3D print that they did and mocked up on their steering linkage arm. So I went ahead and I thought I'd have a bunch of different steering linkages, and here you can see the geometry is pretty organic. Doesn't look that rigid. Here's a mock-up to see if the bell crank would actually clear my wastegate, because I just turned the stock manifolds up and forward, and here's the actual 3D printed pivot bracket, and I needed to terminate my frame. I made, this is a frame alignment mount, and I put a string attached to it and a 3D printed thing so I can cut both sides to the exact same length. Here's me mocking it up, making sure everything's square, and then I went with my cutoff wheel, cut it off, and then got a plate of metal to see where it sat and ground it flat so everything sat nice and flat. Here's what the front end looks like afterward. And bought some Willwood, and this is actually, that steering linkage in this picture is actually iteration 2. I thought I could get all the pickup points on one steering linkage instead of different steering linkages. Then I went and redesigned it again and figured if I made it from 2D parts and just welded it together and clearanced it myself, I could make these parts for like $80 instead of like a couple thousand. So here's my first order, or actually first quote on Send Cut Send. And here's basically the design with the Hayabusa spindle or Hayabusa shocks and the bell crank and how it's going to mount and whatnot. I had to buy some tubular upper control arms to have to push so I could go through it. And items should be showing up today. I'll keep you posted.